The road to Cody County Equine Rescue was nearly invisible beneath the rain. Headlights sliced through the Wyoming darkness, refracted by torrents that seemed to fall sideways in the wind. Emily Carter gripped the wheel with white-knuckled focus, windshield wipers slapping out a nervous rhythm. Just outside Cody, the thunder cracked, close, insistent. She didn't flinch. Not tonight. Emily's battered blue Chevy pulled into a rutted gravel lot behind the rescue barn. The clock on the dash flickered. 9:11 p.m., she killed the engine. For a moment, she just sat, palms pressed to her face, feeling the exhaustion press in behind her eyes. Rain hammered the roof. In the glow of the barn lights, volunteers moved like shadows behind foggy glass. She forced herself out of the truck. Rain ran in cold rivers down her neck, soaking her jeans, filling her boots. The barn door groaned as she shoved it open. Every head inside turned. Conversations dropped to anxious whispers. Emily's hair clung to her cheeks, her breath clouding in the chill. Tom Lawson, the head volunteer, stepped forward, wiping his hands on an old denim jacket. "Emily, wasn't sure you'd make it tonight." She met his gaze, steady, unreadable. "Show me the horse nobody else wants." The barn felt colder. A teenage girl near the feed room stifled a gasp. A pair of older volunteers exchanged worried glances. Emily's reputation preceded her, a nurse who never looked away, even when things got ugly. She was used to people whispering. Tom hesitated, then sighed. "You sure about this?" She nodded. "I didn't come out here for second chances. Not for me." He jerked his head, motioning her down the row of stalls. The air smelled of wet hay, liniment, and the sour tang of fear. A storm lantern sputtered on the wall, shadows leaping. Tom's boots scuffed nervously. "He's down here. Duke, wild Mustang, big. Been through 4 owners, 3 rescues. Infamous for breaking out, throwing riders. Scars from God knows what." Emily felt her heartbeat slow, the world narrowing to a tunnel. She needed to see him. They reached the last stall. Tom fumbled with the latch. "Stay back, he—" But the door swung open before he finished. Out stalked Duke, a massive, deep-chested brown Mustang, scars crisscrossing his flank, one ear notched, eyes wild and rolling white. The muscles in his shoulders flexed under the dim light. Rain thundered against the tin roof. He reared, hooves clattering, air filled with a sound like splitting timber. Tom shouted, ducking away. Emily held her ground. "Easy," she murmured, her voice cutting through the noise. Duke snorted, ears flattened, nostrils flaring. He towered over her, body trembling, eyes darting, expecting pain or force or fear. Instead, Emily simply extended her palm. Silence pulsed in the space between them. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then Duke's head dropped, muscles loosening. He stretched his neck, his breath hot and quick, nostrils touching her hand. Rainwater dripped from Emily's sleeve onto the straw. All the tension in the barn snapped, the air easing as if someone had lifted a weight. Tom stared. Never seen him do that before. Emily didn't look away from the horse. "He's coming with me." A murmur ran through the volunteers. The teenage girl whispered, "That horse is trouble, Emily." Someone else muttered, "He'll hurt her, just like all the others." Emily's eyes flashed, calm but unyielding. "I'm not afraid of him." Tom swallowed. He handed her a battered lead rope, his hands shaking. "This is Duke's last chance. One more mistake and he's done. You understand?" She nodded, fingers closing around the rope. "So am I." As she led Duke from the stall, thunder boomed overhead. The Mustang jerked, muscles bunching, but Emily kept her hand steady on the rope, whispering low and steady. He didn't bolt. Outside, the rain was merciless, lightning splitting the sky behind them. They paused beneath the barn's overhang. For a moment, Duke pressed his body close, searching for warmth or maybe reassurance. Emily looked down at the lead rope, the scars on her own wrists visible beneath her sleeve. For a split second, the world shrank to just the two of them, wounded, wary, but still standing. The volunteers watched from the doorway, silent, uncertain. Tom called out, "Why him, Emily? Why not one of the easy ones?" She didn't answer, just glanced back at Duke, his breath fogging the night air, his wild eyes never quite meeting hers. As they stepped into the darkness, the barn door slammed shut behind them, final, echoing. The headlights of her Chevy flickered, reflected in a puddle, as she loaded Duke with slow, practiced hands. The rain eased for a moment, leaving only the sound of their footsteps and Duke's uneasy snort. She closed the trailer door, climbed into the truck, and sat a long minute before turning the key. Duke shifted restlessly in the trailer behind her, kicking once, twice. She started the engine. On the dashboard, her cell phone vibrated. A message from her ex-husband, unanswered. Hospital alarms, memory fragments, the faces of angry patients, and the echo of slammed doors crowded her mind. Why did she want the horse nobody else wanted? Not even she had the words yet. She only knew the look in Duke's eyes, the same storm she saw in her own reflection. As they pulled out onto the lonely highway, lightning forked across the open sky, lighting up the world for just a second. In that flash, Emily and Duke, a woman and a horse, both haunted, both unwanted, headed toward the unknown. The question lingered in the rain-soaked silence. Was this truly a rescue, or a last chance for them both? The drive home felt endless. The storm trailed Emily and Duke all the way to the edge of Cody, Wyoming, where the Carter family ranch crouched low between rolling fields and weathered fences. By the time they arrived, the rain had softened to a dreary drizzle, but the clouds still hung heavy, threatening more. Emily stepped out of her truck, her boots squelching in the mud. She unlocked the horse trailer, her hands trembling just a little. She wasn't sure if it was from exhaustion or the rush of adrenaline that hadn't left her since the barn. The air was sharp with the scent of wet earth and sage. Duke snorted as she led him down the ramp. He jerked against the rope, his hooves slipping, head jerking side to side, each movement nervous, restless. For a second, Emily worried he'd bolt, tearing away into the misty night. But he stopped just short of the open gate, eyes rolling, sides heaving. She opened the old wooden gate to the paddock, letting him through, then closed it behind her. Duke turned circles, kicking up mud, ears flicking at every distant sound. The barn creaked in the wind. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote barked. Duke shied, almost yanking the lead from Emily's hand. "You're safe," she whispered, though her own voice sounded unsure. Inside the barn, the lights buzzed and flickered. Emily grabbed a flake of hay, tossing it into the corner stall. Duke ignored it, snorting and stamping, muscles bunching under his scarred hide. Emily watched him for a while, her hands stuffed deep in her jacket pockets, shivering despite herself. The ranch was different now. Her father's tools still hung neatly in the shed. Her mother's wind chimes clinked softly outside the kitchen window. But everything else had changed. Her divorce papers sat unsigned on the kitchen table, a stack of old bills underneath. The house felt emptier than ever. She remembered the hospital, alarms blaring, nurses shouting, the sting of antiseptic in her nose. She remembered the day her husband left, the sound of the door slamming, the echo that never seemed to stop. Even now the guilt pressed heavy on her chest, as if every failure had its own weight. She shook her head, forcing herself to focus on Duke. He watched her from the shadows, tail swishing, nostrils flaring at every movement. For hours, he refused food. He paced, bumping into the stall door, flinching from every creak and groan of the old barn. The night dragged on, and Emily found herself sitting in the straw, back against the wall, knees drawn up. She tried to steady her breathing, to let go of the panic that curled in her stomach. Memories flooded in, patients yelling, calling her cold. Her supervisor's voice, "Emily, you can't save everyone." The silence in the house after her husband left. She clenched her fists, fighting the urge to cry. She must have dozed off at some point, because she woke to the sound of Duke moving nearby. The barn was colder, the wind howling outside. She realized she'd been dreaming. Sirens, chaos, all the things she'd tried to outrun. For a moment, she couldn't move, couldn't breathe, her chest tight, hands shaking. Then she felt warmth, a breath, soft and steady. Duke stood over her, his head lowered, nostrils almost touching her cheek. She froze, uncertain. He nudged her shoulder gently, then stood silent and watchful. Emily managed to sit up, wiping her eyes on her sleeve. Duke's breath was warm, grounding. For a strange, fleeting moment, she felt like she wasn't alone. Maybe neither of them was. "Hey," she whispered, voice cracking. "It's okay. We're okay." Duke stamped, shifting his weight, then lowered his head again, watching her closely. Emily reached up, touching his neck, just for a second. He didn't shy away. They stayed like that, woman and horse in the half-dark. The only light a pale beam from the window. Emily felt her heartbeat slow, the panic ebbing. Maybe it was the rhythm of Duke's breathing, or just the fact that he hadn't left her alone on the barn floor. Eventually, she got to her feet, stretching aching muscles. She found a battered old blanket in the tack room, tossed it over Duke's back. He shook himself, but didn't bolt. It was a small victory. As dawn crept through the barn windows, Emily noticed something tangled in Duke's mane. She stepped closer, hands gentle, untangling an old battered tag, thin brass, worn by time and weather. Letters stamped into the metal caught the weak sunlight. Property of J. Harrison, U.S. Forest Service. Emily turned the tag over in her hand. "Who are you, Duke?" she murmured. It didn't make sense. Why would a Mustang from a federal rescue end up abandoned, broken, here on her ranch? What had happened to him with this J. Harrison? Why was he so afraid? Duke stared at her, his eyes dark and unreadable. Emily tucked the tag into her pocket, questions gnawing at her. The story behind the horse was a mystery, but so was the one inside herself. The rest of the morning was spent in silence. Emily brought Duke water, watched him circle, refusing to eat until finally, after hours, he nibbled at the hay. He stayed wary, every muscle tensed, but didn't bolt. Emily made coffee in the empty kitchen, staring out at the barn, wondering what the day would bring. By noon, the sky had cleared. The world outside looked washed clean, as if the storm had swept away more than just mud and dust. Emily watched Duke from the porch, fingers wrapped tight around her mug. For the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of something she'd nearly forgotten: hope. But the questions remained, circling like the wind, about Duke, about herself, about the scars neither of them could hide. And as she watched him, she realized this was only the beginning. They were two fractured spirits, each haunted by a past they couldn't outrun. But maybe, just maybe, together they could find a way forward. Days blended together on the Carter Ranch, each sunrise painting the world in soft gold, and every evening falling quietly around the battered house and faded red barn. For Emily and Duke, time seemed slow. measured not by hours or days, but by tiny, cautious steps toward trust. Their routine formed out of necessity. Each morning, Emily filled Duke's trough with fresh water and scattered oats into a battered metal feed bucket. At first, Duke ignored the food, choosing instead to pace the paddock, ears swiveling toward every distant sound. Trucks on the highway, coyotes in the field, the faint thump of a distant radio. Anything could set him off, muscles bunching, breath coming in fast bursts, but Emily stayed patient. She approached slowly, always talking, her voice a steady rhythm in the quiet. "Hey, Duke. Easy, boy." She never rushed him, never forced contact. She groomed him in soft circles, her brush gentle on his battered hide. Sometimes when he shied away, she'd just sit in the grass a few feet from his hooves, sipping her coffee and watching the sun creep higher. One morning, after a sleepless night, she found herself sitting on the edge of the paddock, knees tucked under her chin. The world felt far away, her troubles almost invisible under the vast blue sky. She reached into her pocket, feeling the small, battered tag, J. Harrison, U.S. Forest Service, its mystery gnawing quietly at her thoughts. She glanced up to see Duke watching her, head tilted. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, cautiously, Duke stepped forward, lowering his muzzle to sniff at her outstretched hand. Emily barely breathed as he flicked his ears and nudged her palm, his lips brushing her skin before retreating. It was the first time he'd come to her willingly. A smile broke across her face, quiet but triumphant. It was a small victory, but it felt enormous. That same morning, Duke finally ate from her hand. He was jumpy, tail swishing, ears twitching at every gust of wind. But he stayed, chewing slowly. Emily watched him, the worries of her past momentarily forgotten. For the first time, she saw not just a wild, wounded animal, but a survivor. Later that week, just as the sky began to lighten, Emily decided to try walking Duke outside the paddock. She clipped a lead rope to his halter and whispered reassurances, heart pounding. The early morning was crisp, the world fresh from last night's rain. As they walked along the old fence line, a neighbor's dog burst from behind a bush, barking wildly. Emily braced for chaos, for Duke to panic and bolt. But to her surprise, Duke only stiffened, ears forward, eyes wide. He took a step back but didn't run. The neighbor, Mrs. Lee, hurried over, apologizing breathlessly. She was a sturdy woman in her 70s, her silver hair tucked under a ball cap. "Sorry about Max. He's a good boy, just excitable," Mrs. Lee called, grabbing the dog's collar. Emily smiled, relief blooming in her chest. "No worries. I thought Duke would lose it, but he didn't." Mrs. Lee looked Duke over, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. "I remember that Mustang. Used to charge anything that moved, back when Harrison had him." Emily's curiosity flared. "You knew J. Harrison?" Mrs. Lee nodded, frowning. "Everyone in town knew him. Firefighter, wild Mustang rescuer. Used to say he had a gift with horses, but something happened. After that fire up in the hills, he changed. Folks said he got reckless. Some horses came back hurt. Some didn't come back at all." Emily's fingers tightened on the lead. "What happened to Duke?" Mrs. Lee shook her head. "No one ever said for sure, but that horse came back different, spooked, wild. I always wondered if he saw something out there that never left him." They talked a while longer, the conversation drifting from horses to ranch repairs to the cost of hay these days. Emily found herself grateful for the company and for Mrs. Lee's gentle kindness. As they parted ways, Mrs. Lee called back, "Don't give up on him. Some scars run deep, but they can heal." Emily walked Duke back to the barn, her thoughts tumbling. She brushed him down, talking softly about everything and nothing. Duke's eyes grew calmer, his breath slow and warm against her hand. Each day, the routines grew. Emily made sure to spend a few minutes every afternoon just being present. No agenda, no rush. Sometimes she sat in the paddock and read a book, letting Duke graze nearby. Other times she'd close her eyes and listen to the sounds of the ranch. The distant lowing of cattle, the rustle of grass, the steady rhythm of Duke's breathing. One golden evening, as the sun dipped low and the shadows stretched across the fields, Emily found herself humming an old lullaby her mother used to sing. Duke, head down, wandered close and stood beside her, shoulder to shoulder, content just to be near. The old pain in Emily's chest eased a little, the burden of guilt growing lighter. She felt a cautious hope, like maybe this place, this horse could be a new beginning. But the mystery of Duke's past remained. At night, Emily turned the tag over in her hands, searching for answers. Who was Jay Harrison? What had happened during that fire? And why had Duke been labeled unmanageable, abandoned when he needed someone most? The questions lingered, even as small victories multiplied. Both woman and horse carried old scars, but together they found comfort in slow mornings and quiet evenings. The wounds were not gone, but they were, perhaps, a little less raw. Sometimes, healing started with the smallest things: the trust in a gentle touch, the safety of a familiar voice, the patience to wait for tomorrow. In those soft Wyoming evenings, as the world turned gold and quiet around them, Emily and Duke, two survivors, learned how to hope again. Nights in the Wyoming foothills could feel endless, especially when sleep was just another battleground. Emily lay in bed, listening to the wind scrape branches against the window, her mind whirring restlessly. The old clock on her nightstand ticked out slow, uneven minutes. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw fragments from the hospital, flashing alarms, angry voices, the cold snap of latex gloves, faces turned away in disappointment. The silence of the empty house pressed down, almost suffocating. After a while, she would rise, slip on her boots and head out to the barn, seeking comfort in the familiar shape of Duke's silhouette. He was always awake, too, pacing his stall, head jerking at every distant sound. It was as if the darkness unsettled them both, two souls adrift in the night. Emily kept her flashlight low, careful not to startle him. She spoke softly, recounting her day, or sometimes just whispering nonsense, letting the sound of her voice fill the empty space. "You ever wonder what you're doing here, Duke?" she murmured, the words hanging in the air. "Sometimes I do." The barn itself seemed to breathe with them, wooden beams creaking, wind whistling through chinks in the boards. There was something sacred about the hush before dawn, a time when even old scars could seem invisible. Emily's insomnia wasn't new, but now it was laced with fresh doubts. Could she really help Duke? Was she just trying to fix him because she didn't know how to fix herself? She thought of her therapist, Karen, whose gentle voice echoed in her memory. "Healing isn't a straight line, Emily. You have to allow yourself setbacks. You have to forgive yourself, too." It was easier said than done. Some days, Emily called Karen on the porch, phone pressed tight against her ear, Duke grazing in the distance. She told her about Duke's small victories, the morning he let her braid a red ribbon into his mane, the afternoon he stood calm while she mended the fence. She also confessed her fears. "I'm terrified I'll mess this up. If I push too hard, he'll break. If I do nothing, maybe I'll lose him anyway." Karen listened patiently. "You and Duke, both of you need time. He doesn't need you to be perfect, Emily. He just needs you to stay." Sometimes after those calls, Emily felt a little lighter, as if her secrets weighed less under Wyoming's enormous sky. But Duke's triggers were never far away. On the 4th of July, Emily stocked up on hay and apples, dreading the coming fireworks. She tried to distract herself, fixing a loose hinge on the barn door, scrubbing water troughs until her hands ached. As dusk settled, the first distant boom rolled over the hills. Duke's head shot up, nostrils flaring, eyes wild with panic. The sky exploded in color, red, white, blue. Duke spun in his stall, slamming into the walls, sweat darkening his coat. Emily dropped everything and ran to him, heart pounding. She found him trembling in the corner, nostrils wide, legs shaking. Without thinking, she slid into the straw and wrapped her arms around his neck. "Easy, boy, easy. I'm here," she whispered, voice shaking. He shuddered, muscles twitching under her hands. She stayed there all night, humming softly, sometimes singing bits of lullabies her mother used to sing. Duke eventually lowered his head, breath warm against her lap, eyes finally closing as exhaustion took over. Emily stroked his mane, fighting back tears. In the silent aftermath, she saw her own reflection in Duke's eyes, haunted, raw, desperate for comfort. Days later, she couldn't shake the memory of that night. She sat at her kitchen table, the battered tag from Duke's mane clutched in her palm. It still read, "Property of J. Harrison, U.S. Forest Service." The mystery gnawed at her. Why would a government rescue horse be labeled unmanageable and abandoned? Determined to learn more, Emily booted up her old laptop, the screen flickering to life. She searched through news archives, piecing together stories about the wildfires that swept through Shoshone National Forest 2 summers ago. There it was, a photograph of smoke curling over the hills, a headline, "Forest Fire Rescue Ends in Tragedy, Horses Lost, Firefighter Injured." Her heart thudded as she read. J. Harrison had led a last-ditch effort to save a herd of wild mustangs trapped by flames. The operation went wrong. Multiple horses perished, some vanished. Harrison was hospitalized with burns and a concussion. Only one Mustang was found alive in the aftermath, a brown stallion, scarred and hostile, branded as dangerous. Duke. The article quoted a witness. "That horse came out of the fire wild as the blaze itself. He's never been right since." Emily shut the laptop, the weight of the past pressing in. Duke had seen something unspeakable, loss, terror, abandonment. He hadn't just survived. He'd been blamed for surviving wrong. She sat on the porch that evening, knees pulled to her chest, the tag cold in her palm. The Wyoming sky stretched wide overhead, streaked with the last colors of sunset. Duke grazed quietly in the fading light, his silhouette framed by the hills. Emily spoke softly, voice barely more than a breath. "You weren't unmanageable, Duke. You were just hurt, just like me." She realized in that moment that their wounds, hers and Duke's, weren't something to hide or fix overnight. They were part of their story. Healing, she understood, wasn't about erasing scars, but learning to live with them. The question still haunted her. What really happened during that fire, and who had failed Duke? But another truth burned brighter. Neither of them was alone in their pain anymore. The stars winked to life one by one. The world was quiet, and for the first time in a long time, Emily felt the tiniest flicker of peace. The following week dawned cloudless and brittle, the kind of morning where the Wyoming sky stretched so blue and wide it almost hurt to look at. Emily awoke early, her sleep still restless, but a new determination burning quietly inside her. She'd spent the last few days combing through news archives and local records, piecing together the truth behind Duke's scarred history. Still, there was more she didn't know, and more she had to face, starting with her own neighbors. After feeding Duke and making sure he'd settled, Emily drove into town for supplies. Cody was small, a place where news moved faster than the wind and privacy was a rare luxury. At the feed store, heads turned as she walked in. She heard the whispers, felt the eyes on her butt. That's Emily Carter, the nurse who took in that wild Mustang. She's got a death wish bringing that horse home. Shouldn't be allowed, after what happened with Harrison. Emily kept her head high, but her hands trembled as she paid for grain and hay cubes. The cashier, a younger man with earnest brown eyes, hesitated as he handed her the receipt. Be careful out there, Miss Carter. Folks, they talk, but they don't know what you're dealing with. She managed a tired smile. Nobody does, unless they try. Back at the ranch, she found Duke waiting at the gate, pacing, his body language tense. It wasn't just the usual restlessness. It was as if he could sense the rising storm around them. Emily stroked his neck, murmuring soft reassurances, but her own nerves jangled. The first real sign of trouble appeared that night. After dinner, Emily went to the barn to check on Duke one last time before bed. The moon cast a pale light across the yard, and then she saw it. Someone had spray-painted the side of her barn in ugly red letters, "Get rid of the beast." Her breath caught in her chest. Anger, fear, and humiliation all crashed together inside her. She stood for a long moment, frozen, then pulled out her phone and snapped a picture. She would not let this go unanswered. The next morning, Emily tried to scrub the graffiti off with soap and water, her arms aching with every stroke. She was halfway through when Mrs. Lee arrived with a loaf of bread and her ever-present calm. "Oh, honey," Mrs. Lee shook her head, helping Emily scrub. "Some folks need a monster to blame. You and that horse, remind them of things they don't want to see in themselves." Emily's eyes stung, not just from the fumes, but from the kindness in Mrs. Lee's voice. "I never wanted to cause trouble. I just couldn't leave him there. You did the right thing. Don't let them make you doubt it." Word traveled fast. By that afternoon, the local vet, Dr. Morales, came by with his black bag and a no-nonsense look. He checked Duke's legs and teeth, nodding approvingly. "He looks better than I expected. You've done right by him, Emily. People forget. Duke once saved a foal from drowning during a flash flood. That's the horse I remember, not the monster in their stories." Emily's heart swelled with relief. "Thank you, Dr. Morales. That means more than you know." But the town's resistance only hardened. Rumors swirled that Duke had attacked children, trampled dogs, even chased a mail carrier. None of it true, but it spread like wildfire. Teenagers rode by on bikes, shouting insults or tossing stones at the fence. At night, Emily double-checked every lock and slept with her phone by the bed. One evening, desperate to understand the full story, Emily dug deeper into the old box of files Mrs. Lee had lent her. Tucked among faded photos and yellowed news clippings, she found a stack of local articles about the fire that nearly took Duke's life. Forest Service under fire. J. Harrison accused of animal cruelty, mismanagement. The words leaped off the page. The investigation had been ugly. Claims that Harrison had pushed horses too hard, neglected injuries, driven his team into danger for the sake of his own pride. He was never charged, but his reputation was ruined. The only survivor from his last rescue attempt was Duke. Emily's hands shook as she read. No wonder the town was wary. Pain and blame ran deep out here, sometimes deeper than truth. That night, she sat on the porch, watching fireflies flicker in the field, Duke stood nearby, grazing quietly. She realized for the first time how much of her own pain she had poured into saving him. Maybe she wasn't just fighting for Duke. Maybe she was fighting for every part of herself the world had told her was too much or too broken. A sudden noise broke her thoughts. Shouts and laughter by the barn. She raced over, flashlight in hand, heart pounding. The teens were already gone, but they'd knocked over buckets, scattered tack, and left muddy footprints everywhere. Duke stood in the far corner, wide-eyed but unhurt. She knelt beside him, whispering, "They don't get to decide who you are, or who I am, not anymore." Determined, Emily called Dr. Morales the next morning, asking for advice on how to legally protect Duke from harassment. He promised to help. Mrs. Lee baked more bread, dropping off a warm loaf and a handwritten note. "You are not alone. Some of us remember the truth." For the first time, Emily realized she wasn't as isolated as she felt. Some people still believed in second chances, and she knew she had to keep fighting. Not just for Duke, but for every lost cause the world had given up on. As the sun set, painting the ranch in warm orange and gold, Emily stood beside Duke, her hand resting on his broad back. The world was still against them, but for the first time she believed they could win. The past might haunt them, but the future was still unwritten. Emily awoke to the sharp ring of her phone, heart racing before she was even fully conscious. Sunlight spilled across her bedroom, promising a peaceful morning. But her gut told her otherwise. She reached for the phone, bracing herself. It was the postmaster, voice strained and clipped. "Emily, I hate to call you so early, but your horse, he spooked and knocked over the mail carrier's bike. Nobody's hurt, but there's talk. I'm sorry, but folks are upset." Emily's chest tightened. "Thank you for telling me. I'll talk to them, and I'll cover any damages." After hanging up, she stared at the ceiling, fighting a wave of dread. The tension in Cody was rising, the sense of isolation pressing closer. She dressed quickly and hurried outside, scanning the yard for any sign of Duke. He stood at the far end of the paddock, skittish, sides heaving. A broken fence post and scattered mail confirmed the story. She checked Duke for injuries, running her hands down his legs, speaking quietly. "It's all right, buddy. You didn't mean to. It's not your fault." She fixed the fence, her mind whirling with anxiety. As she finished, a truck rolled up, dust billowing. Sheriff Baker stepped out, big and broad-shouldered, his expression unreadable. "Morning, Emily. We got a complaint." He eyed Duke, then the broken fence. "I know you're trying, but some folks want that horse gone. Petitions going around." Emily squared her shoulders, meeting his gaze. "He's not dangerous. He's scared. There's a difference." Baker looked tired. "Town's scared too, Emily. But I know you. I'll give you time to sort this out. Just keep him contained, okay?" She nodded, relief and frustration mixing in her chest. "I will. Thanks, Sheriff." But as the sheriff drove away, Emily saw a slip of paper wedged in her gate, in thick black marker. "We won't let that horse hurt anyone again." Her hands shook as she crumpled the note. Fear flickered, but underneath it, a spark of defiance caught. She wouldn't give up. Not now. That afternoon, Duke shadowed her every step, never letting her out of sight. He was jumpier than usual, flinching at sudden noises, but Emily made her presence a shield. She sang while mucking stalls, told him old family stories as she refilled water buckets. Each word was a thread tying him closer to calm. Dr. Morales visited, concern furrowing his brow as he checked Duke's vital signs. "He's stressed, Emily, but it's not just him. Horses are like sponges for human emotion. The more anxious you are, the more he feels it. Emily nodded, exhaustion heavy in her bones. It's like fighting a war on all fronts. Maybe you're not the only one fighting. Dr. Morales leaned against the stall door, thoughtful. There are other rescue horses in the county with the same scars. Panic attacks, unpredictable outbursts, haunted eyes. Some were even part of the same rescue network as Duke. He's not alone. The idea lingered in Emily's mind, both comforting and troubling. If Duke wasn't the only one, how many others were suffering quietly, blamed for wounds they never asked for? Outside the barn, Emily spotted Mrs. Lee waiting with a thermos of sweet tea and a sympathetic smile. "Got your back, hun. Some of us see the truth. We know pain when we see it, and we know when it's not the horse's fault." They sat on the porch, sipping tea and watching clouds drift by. Emily confided in Mrs. Lee, voice low. "They want to take him away. I'm scared, but I can't let them win. I made him a promise." Mrs. Lee patted her hand. "You keep that promise. Sometimes standing alone is the only way to make a difference." Word spread quickly that a petition was circulating. By evening, several neighbors, some she'd known for years, drove by slowly, eyes hard, hands tight on steering wheels. Emily felt the chill, the invisible line drawn between herself and the rest of Cody. A few supporters reached out, a young mother who'd heard what Duke did for the foal, an old rancher who remembered the fire and blamed Harrison, not the horse. But they were quiet voices against a louder crowd. Emily kept her routine steady. Every day she spent more time with Duke, long walks along the fence line, slow grooming sessions, even reading aloud as twilight settled over the fields. The simple, gentle repetition seemed to soothe them both. One evening, as Emily brushed Duke's mane beneath a sky streaked pink and gold, a neighbor, Mr. Sutton, stopped by the fence. "Heard about the petition," he said, scratching his beard. "Most folks just don't understand what trauma does. To people, to animals. They see something broken, and they want it gone." Emily looked him in the eye. "We're not broken. We're healing. There's a difference." He nodded, almost smiling. "Takes guts to stand up for what's right. If you need anything, you let me know." As the days passed, Emily felt the community dividing around her. Some called her stubborn, reckless, even dangerous. Others offered quiet support, a bag of feed left by her gate, a kind word at the gas station, a thumbs up from across Main Street. It was a slow, painful war of attrition. Late one night, unable to sleep, Emily stood in the pasture watching stars pulse above the fields. Duke pressed his nose against her shoulder, his breath warm and steady. She looked at the moonlit hills and made a vow, her voice just a whisper. "I'll protect you no matter what, even if I stand alone." With every challenge, Emily's resolve deepened. She wasn't just fighting for Duke anymore. She was fighting for every creature, every person who'd ever been told they were too damaged to save. Tomorrow would bring new battles, but tonight, in the hush of the Wyoming night, Emily and Duke stood together, unbroken, unbowed, and for the first time, truly not alone. July settled in with fierce heat, and the grass around Cody dried into brittle gold. On the horizon, gray smoke sometimes curled, a constant reminder that fire season was no longer a distant threat. The talk in town was of water bans and fire drills, people double-checking escape routes, kids learning what to do if the alarm ever sounded. It was a Thursday when everything changed. Emily woke before dawn to the acrid smell of smoke and the low hum of helicopters passing overhead. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A county alert. Wildfire warning. Evacuation possible. She bolted upright, heart pounding. Immediately, she ran outside, scanning the horizon. Flames glimmered orange far to the west, just beyond the rolling hills, a new fire eating its way through the scrub pine and dry grass. Sirens echoed in the distance. Within an hour, Cody was in chaos. Sheriff Baker drove up and down the main roads, bullhorn in hand, urging everyone to pack up and get out. Trucks sped past, loaded with suitcases, livestock trailers, dogs barking frantically. The air was tense and bitter with fear. Emily moved quickly, grabbing the essentials: important papers, first aid kit, a few clothes, and her grandmother's locket. She ran to the barn and found Duke already agitated, his ears pinned back, nostrils wide with alarm. "Easy, buddy. I'm here," she soothed, her hands steady on the halter. She led him to the paddock and loaded him into the trailer, her muscles trembling from adrenaline and dread. Just as she was about to lock up the house, a sheriff's cruiser screeched to a stop outside her gate. The deputy, face soot-streaked and eyes wild, ran up, voice hoarse. "Emily, Jacob Miller's missing. He was last seen at the North Pasture. His folks think he got turned around in the confusion." Emily's heart stopped. Jacob, 7 years old, shy and sensitive, had always been drawn to horses. "I'll help look," she said, not hesitating for a second. The deputy shook his head. "It's too dangerous. You should get out with the others." But Emily cut him off, her voice sharp. "He's just a kid. He could die out there. Let me try. Duke can help. He's trained. He can find people." The deputy hesitated, then nodded, desperation overriding protocol. "You have 1 hour. If you're not back, we send in the rest of the crew." Emily didn't waste a second. She called Mrs. Lee and Dr. Morales, both already mobilizing to help. Mrs. Lee brought her old radio, Dr. Morales a basic medical kit. "Be careful, Emily," Mrs. Lee warned. "This isn't just smoke and mirrors. This is life or death." Emily led Duke out of the trailer, her own anxiety mirrored in his restless energy. "Come on, boy. We've got work to do." They set off toward the North Pasture, the air growing thicker with every step. Ash rained down in gray flecks, turning the world to twilight in the middle of the day. Emily kept her voice low and steady, calling Jacob's name, scanning every dip and rise in the land. Duke's ears flicked forward suddenly, nostrils flaring. He snorted, then veered off the trail, his pace quickening. Emily let the reins out, trusting him. "Find him, Duke. You know what to do." The horse plunged into a tangle of scrub and fallen branches. Emily ducking low, branches slapping her arms and face. Her eyes watered from the smoke, lungs burning. But she didn't stop. The world shrank to the sound of her own heart and Duke's thudding hooves. A faint sound reached her ears, a weak cry, half choked by smoke. "Help! Over here!" Emily's pulse exploded. She spotted a small figure beneath a deadfall branch, pinned and coughing. "Jacob, hang on!" she called, already sliding off Duke's back. The branch was heavy, wedged across Jacob's leg. Emily tried to lift it, but it wouldn't budge. She looked at Duke, his massive body, his coiled strength, and made a split-second decision. "Duke, here, help me!" She wrapped the lead around the branch, guiding Duke into place. With a quiet command and a gentle tug, Duke heaved, muscles straining. The branch shifted, then rolled away, freeing Jacob's leg. Emily dropped to her knees, checking Jacob for injuries. Scrapes, bruises, nothing broken. He was terrified, but alive. "It's okay, sweetheart. We've got you. Duke found you." Duke stood over them, eyes gentle, nostrils blowing warm reassurance. Emily pulled Jacob onto her back, whispering encouragements as they made their way back toward the road. As they emerged from the smoke, townsfolk cheered. Some wept openly. The sheriff ran forward, scooping Jacob into his arms. "You saved him, Emily. God, you and that horse." His voice cracked. Jacob clung to Emily, eyes wide, then reached out to stroke Duke's nose. "He's not scary at all," he whispered, a smile breaking through his grime. "He's the bravest horse ever." Mrs. Lee and Dr. Morales arrived, tears streaming, hugging Emily and patting Duke. The whole town seemed to surge with emotion. The horse they'd feared, the woman they'd doubted. They were heroes now, the crowd chanting Duke's name. For a moment, Emily closed her eyes, letting the relief wash over her. The risk, the isolation, the fight. They'd all been worth it for this. Duke lowered his head, accepting the pats, and whispered thanks, his wild eyes now full of something new, pride, and the beginnings of trust. The fire raged on, but for Emily, Duke, and Cody, something fundamental had shifted. In the smoky foothills, 2 survivors had saved a life, and maybe, just maybe, saved themselves too. The wildfire's fury finally broke with the arrival of rain, thick, cold, and blessedly heavy, soaking the charred ground and dousing the last of the embers. Cody's skies cleared, but the town itself felt forever changed. Overnight, Emily and Duke became the talk of every porch, diner, and grocery aisle. People who'd once crossed the street to avoid Emily now stopped her in public, voices softer, eyes newly respectful. The Miller family, Jacob's parents, showed up at Emily's front gate just as the last fire trucks rolled out of town. Jacob ran ahead, his limp nearly gone, and hugged Duke's great neck with fearless joy. "Thank you, Emily," Jacob's mother said, her voice thick. "And thank Duke. He's a hero, whatever anyone says." Emily smiled, ruffling Jacob's hair. "He did all the hard work, didn't you, big guy?" Duke nickered, lowering his head to nuzzle Jacob's shoulder. The gesture so gentle it made Mrs. Miller tear up again. But as gratitude bloomed, so did uncomfortable truths. Jacob, open as only a child can be, began talking about his old visits to Harrison's training camp, how Duke had protected him from the older, more aggressive horses, and stood between him and danger. "I wasn't supposed to be in the pens, but Duke never let me get hurt," Jacob told anyone who would listen. "Even when Mr. Harrison yelled." The story swept through Cody like a prairie wind. Suddenly, questions about Jay Harrison's past treatment of horses and children resurfaced, ugly and insistent. Parents talked late into the night about rumors, old bruises, missing animals, horses that had disappeared or come back broken. The local paper published a scathing editorial, demanding answers from the Forest Service and town council. Emily, emboldened by what she'd witnessed and Jacob's story, decided it was time to confront the past head-on. She gathered every scrap of evidence she'd collected, clippings, statements, her own photos of Duke's scars and the battered tag. She wrote out her testimony, practiced in the mirror, and then called the town council to request a public meeting. The night of the meeting, Cody's town hall was packed. People stood in the aisles, murmurs rippling through the crowd as Emily approached the microphone. She felt the weight of all their stares, some hostile, most hopeful. Duke's battered brass tag was warm in her fist, a talisman. She spoke, voice steady, sharing everything. Her first night at the rescue, Duke's history, the graffiti, the threats, Jacob's rescue, and most of all, the old wounds covered up by years of silence. "This isn't just about one horse," Emily finished. "It's about the way we look at the unwanted, the broken. It's about second chances, for animals and people alike." A hush followed. Then Mrs. Lee stood, her voice quivering with anger. Jay Harrison hurt more than horses. He turned this town against its own. We need justice, and we need healing. Others joined in. Dr. Morales shared his own experiences treating rescue horses with scars that told stories no one wanted to hear. Parents described children who'd come home afraid, carrying secrets about Harrison's cruelty. For the first time, the community looked at itself and didn't turn away. The council announced an investigation that night, pledging to uncover the truth and protect all animals and children in their care. As the meeting adjourned, the mayor approached Emily, shaking her hand. "You did something brave, Miss Carter. You changed more than just one life tonight." Within days, officers from the state and Forest Service arrived. They reopened files, interviewed volunteers, and pieced together a long history of neglect, cruelty, and illegal activities. Jay Harrison was arrested on multiple charges: abuse, endangerment, falsifying records. His name, once spoken with deference, now carried only shame. Emily found herself thrust into a new role: spokesperson for animal welfare, advocate for the voiceless. She appeared at town events, spoke at schools, and shared Duke's story with anyone who would listen. She founded a small coalition with Mrs. Lee and Dr. Morales, pushing for better regulations and funding for local rescues. They called it Duke's Hope. The change wasn't instant, but it was real. More people volunteered at the rescue, offering time, donations, and, most importantly, understanding. Old rivalries faded, replaced by a sense of shared purpose. Emily watched as fences were mended, not just in the fields, but in the hearts of her neighbors. For Duke, life blossomed in ways Emily had barely dared hope for. He no longer shied from touch. Instead, he greeted visitors with gentle curiosity, accepting pats and apples with quiet dignity. The children who once hid behind their parents' legs now lined up to stroke his mane and whisper secrets into his ear. His scars were still visible, but they became badges of survival, not shame. One crisp morning, as autumn rolled in, Emily found herself surrounded by friends and supporters in the barnyard. Jacob, now more confident than ever, stood beside Duke, holding a ribbon he'd made out of red yarn. "For being the bravest horse, and for saving me," Jacob declared, tying the ribbon around Duke's neck. Emily's throat tightened as applause broke out. She knelt beside Duke, looking up at the crowd, at faces she'd once dreaded seeing, and felt hope crack open inside her, bright and fierce. Cody was no longer a place where people whispered and pointed. It was becoming a town that listened, that healed, that stood up for those who couldn't stand alone. As the sun set behind the foothills, painting everything gold, Emily stroked Duke's muzzle and whispered, "You saved me too, you know. More than you'll ever understand." And in that moment, surrounded by her community, Emily believed it. The first frost crept across the Carter Ranch in thin, glittering sheets. The air felt sharper, more honest. Life in Cody, Wyoming, had finally quieted after the storm of investigation and reckoning. Yet as autumn deepened, a different kind of change stirred within Emily and Duke. A slower, gentler transformation that came not with headlines or applause, but in the hush of everyday living. Emily sat most mornings on the porch with a cup of coffee cradled in her hands. Duke grazing in the golden pasture beyond the fence. Sunlight set the fields alight, every blade of grass catching fire with memory and hope. Sometimes, Emily would turn over the old brass tag in her palm, property of Jay Harrison, its sharp letters worn smooth from her touch. She remembered the first time she'd seen Duke, wild and wounded, every muscle tense and eyes wary. She remembered how she'd felt just as lost, dragging her own invisible scars behind her. Failed marriage, restless nights, the weight of saving lives and sometimes losing them anyway. Now she saw how far they both had come. Healing, she realized, was never simple or linear. Some days the old panic returned, catching her off guard in the middle of grocery shopping, or when a siren wailed in the distance. Some nights, Duke would wake, nostrils flaring, body trembling from dreams he couldn't explain. But those moments passed faster now. Each day, they faced the world's sharp edges together. On a quiet Saturday, Emily found herself sitting in the grass while Duke stood nearby, head lowered, chewing thoughtfully. She reached out, her fingers brushing his mane. "You know," she murmured, "they called you unmanageable, broken. But you were just hurt, just trying to survive." She saw her own reflection in Duke's deep, patient eyes, saw the parts of herself she'd tried to hide. She realized that her commitment to Duke, her refusal to give up on him, had been her own path to healing. By fighting for his trust, she'd learned to trust herself again, to be patient with her own wounds, to let herself believe in second chances. Duke's transformation was its own quiet miracle. He was no longer the wild, unpredictable Mustang who spooked at every shadow. Now, he approached the ranch's children with gentle curiosity, lowering his head so they could pat his scarred cheek. He nuzzled Mrs. Lee when she came by with apples. He even walked calmly to the fence when strangers visited, his eyes calm, his body loose and unafraid. Sometimes Emily would catch herself marveling at how his scars, once so jarring, now seemed almost beautiful, woven into his story like threads of silver through dark cloth. His resilience inspired others. Neighbors who once feared him now stopped by just to watch him run in the pasture, strong and free. The deeper lesson, Emily knew, was not just about horses. Cody itself was changing. The investigation into Harrison's cruelty led to new laws, stricter regulations for rescue operations, funding for mental health programs, and a local initiative for trauma survivors, both human and animal. People who once shied away from their own brokenness started talking openly about grief, healing, and what it meant to truly care for one another. One evening, the town hosted a candlelight vigil on the courthouse steps. Emily was asked to speak. She stood before her neighbors, voice steady, Duke's story echoing in her words. "We all carry wounds. Some you see, some you don't. But healing is possible when we face those wounds together. When we look past fear and reach for understanding, we become more than just a collection of mistakes. We become a community." She saw heads nodding, tears shining in the eyes of people who had once turned away. Mrs. Lee hugged her tight after, whispering, "You gave this town back its heart, Emily." The next day, Jacob, now a little taller, more confident, rode his bike to the ranch with a hand-painted sign, "Thank you, Duke." He hung it on the gate, then spent the afternoon tossing a ball for Duke, who played along, chasing and snorting with real, childlike joy. Emily knew that not all wounds would ever fully close. She still had moments when guilt and sorrow washed over her. But she also understood now that scars were not evidence of failure. They were proof of survival, proof that healing, though imperfect and slow, was always possible. On the porch that night, as stars flared bright above the fields, Emily looked at Duke and felt something she hadn't in years: peace. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of hope, strong, steady, and shared. The town of Cody, too, found new purpose. Community projects sprang up: a garden for trauma survivors, a fund for animal welfare, new support groups meeting at the library. The story of Emily and Duke, once whispered in fear, became a lesson told in classrooms and at family dinners. Help the unwanted. Trust again. Change begins with compassion. One crisp morning, as Emily sipped her coffee and Duke grazed close by, she spoke softly, almost to herself, but also to him. Every scar tells a story. The bravest thing you can do is trust again and help someone else do the same. Duke's ears flicked toward her. He took a few slow steps, pressed his muzzle gently against her hand, and let out a breath that seemed to carry both of their old ghosts away. Together, they faced the day, unafraid, unfinished, and truly healing at last. The years that followed Duke's rescue marked a quiet revolution in Cody. The once divided town found itself stitched back together, thread, by small acts of courage and kindness. The story of a broken horse and a wounded woman became more than local folklore. It became the heartbeat of a community determined to change. Each fall, Cody hosted a community festival in the town square. It started as a modest event, just a hayride, a potluck, and a bonfire. But after the wildfire, it transformed into something greater. This year, as sunlight filtered through the turning leaves, the townspeople gathered in droves, laughter and music spilling through the crisp air. Stalls lined the street. Children darted between hay bales, and banners flapped with hand-painted slogans. Kindness heals. Every scar tells a story. Emily stood near the main stage, her hands trembling a little, not from fear but from anticipation. Duke, glossy and calm, stood by her side, ribbons braided into his mane by half the children in town. His once wild eyes watched the crowd with steady confidence, his head nodding to every passing pat and apple slice. Mayor Garcia, beaming with pride, took the microphone. "We gather today not just to celebrate our harvest, but to honor what it means to stand up for those who need us most." Duke's story, Emily's story, reminds us all that hope isn't a thing of fairy tales. It's something we build together, one day at a time. The mayor beckoned Emily and Duke onto the stage. The crowd erupted in applause as Duke walked up the steps, unhurried and unafraid. Mayor Garcia placed a shiny medal around the Mustang's neck. "For bravery, for healing, for second chances," she announced, voice thick with emotion. Emily knelt by Duke's side, stroking his shoulder as Jacob, his limp now just a memory, stepped up to the mic. His voice, though small, carried far. "I used to be scared. I thought people wouldn't listen. But Emily and Duke saved me. They showed me that no one is too lost to be found." He turned, looking at Emily, eyes bright. "Thank you for not giving up." Mrs. Lee and Dr. Morales joined them on stage, each holding back tears. Together, they unveiled a new plaque for the town square. Duke's hope for animals, for people, for tomorrow below. A list of donors and supporters had already begun to grow. Later that evening, after the sun had set and the lanterns glowed soft and golden, Emily found herself surrounded by old friends and new neighbors alike. Mrs. Lee laughed as she recounted the first time she'd seen Duke eat oats from Emily's hand. Dr. Morales shared updates on the rescue network, now thriving and better funded, with a waiting list of volunteers. And there was Jacob, running through the grass, stopping only to throw his arms around Duke's neck. "You're my hero," he whispered, grinning up at Emily. She hugged them both, her heart brimming with something she could finally name: gratitude. The changes in Cody went deeper than any festival or plaque. Harrison's arrest became a rallying cry, a warning to anyone who dare mistreat the vulnerable, animal or human. New laws passed swiftly, ensuring regular inspections, better funding for mental health, and new community resources. People stopped whispering about trauma. They started talking about it, facing it, healing it together. Neighbors who had barely spoken now shared coffee and laughter at the local diner. Isolated families became friends, brought together by barn dances, rescue projects, and shared victories over the shadows of the past. Children who once hid from horses now begged to volunteer, eager to brush manes and scoop feed. no longer afraid of scars. For Emily, the greatest change was quieter, deeper. The house that had once felt haunted by regret now rang with life. Guests at the table, music in the kitchen, and Duke's steady presence in the barn. She found joy in the smallest things, the weight of Duke's head on her shoulder, the taste of homemade bread from Mrs. Lee, the warmth of Jacob's hand in hers. Sometimes she caught herself laughing without realizing it. The old heaviness gone. Years passed. Duke's coat grew grayer at the muzzle, but his spirit never faded. He remained a fixture at every festival, every rescue, every classroom visit. Emily often sat with him in the early morning, wildflowers growing over the pastures, the world quiet and full of possibility. One spring day, the town gathered to remember those lost to the wildfire and to celebrate how far they'd come. After the ceremony, Emily walked alone to a quiet hillside outside town. Duke's grave rested beneath a stand of aspens, marked by a simple stone and a cluster of wildflowers she planted each year. She knelt, fingertips brushing the soft earth. "Thank you, old friend," she whispered, her voice steady. "You saved more than you'll ever know." As she rose, a young, spirited Mustang trotted up the hill, his eyes bright, mane tangled with the wind. Emily smiled, recognizing that uncertain, hopeful look. She reached out, and the new horse stepped closer, nostrils flaring, ready for his own beginning. The cycle of healing, she realized, never truly ended. Each act of compassion created ripples, through families, through towns, through time itself. As she led the new Mustang home, she looked out over the valley, feeling the sun on her face. Her story, Duke's story, Cody's story, it was all proof that no soul is beyond saving. At the next festival, the narrator's voice rang out as the crowd gathered close. No soul is beyond saving. If you reach out to the lost, the wounded, you may just find your own story rewritten. Choose kindness. It changes everything. As the people of Cody cheered and wildflowers swayed in the breeze, Emily knew she'd found what she was searching for all along. A new beginning, born of scars and hope, and a community that chose love again and again. If this story touched your heart, remember, even the smallest act of kindness can change a life. Support your local rescues, lend a hand to your neighbors, and never underestimate the power of a second chance. Like and follow for more stories, because you never know whose life you might change next.